Hello and welcome to The Blueprint. I'm your host, Marley Finnegan. And before we dig in, please click like and subscribe below. No matter where you get your podcast, it helps us to reach more people. Also, consider leaving us a small donation, whether that be $1, $5 via one of the links below. It really helps us in funding the creation of this work. And it means a lot to know that you're out there and that you like us. So let's dig in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Blueprint Within. I am overjoyed to be joined today by my very new friend that feels like an old friend, Lucy Love. She is the creator of Purely Being Meditations, online courses, and community. So welcome here, Lucy.
Hi, Marley. I am very, very excited to be here. These kinds of conversations I've listened to your podcast are just, yeah, the bread and butter of my life. So I'm really excited to speak with you today.
Amazing. And I want to give a little bit of storytelling to context of how I know Lucy, and I'm using air quotes because we are truly new in physical reality of meeting. But I found her podcast Purely Being in 2018 or 2019. It was really when I was just getting into my spiritual world and starting to meditate as a regular practice. I have shared her work with so many people. It's also referenced as a tool within the Blueprint Within resources for season 1. And really, during the pandemic, I tuned into her meditations every single day, oftentimes doing 30-minute versions or some of the longer versions. And she has really every length possible, including like as quick as I believe 3 minutes. But I have for many years now listened to her meditations when I drift into sleep state, which is a real like subconscious reprogramming hack. And I just find, Lucy, I find your work to be so light and so full of love and clarity. But I would personally love to know, and I would love to share with the Blueprint community more about your story. So would love to understand sort of your childhood and if there were any sort of spiritual milestones or how and when you really sort of understood this infinite knowing of your spirit that you definitely house within.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm so honored to hear that from you. I definitely feel like we're kindred souls. As I was listening to your podcast, I had this image of like a clump of grapes, and I kind of felt like I think our souls are on the same clump of grapes, just based on what we're interested in and passionate about. But
I love
yeah,
that.
as yeah, interestingly enough, I really feel like I've had 2 or 3 lifetimes within my lifetime. My childhood was different from my teenagehood, was is different from my adulthood. And if there were any kind of, signs or what kind of pointed that I would be doing this later in life, it's just that I was a very, very sensitive child. And so kind of like anxious and tight and overwhelmed. It's funny because sometimes I run into people who are like, oh, I feel like I'm getting back to my childlike self again. And for me, I'm almost like, I'm happily kind of getting away from that, like, poor little Lucy that was so scared of life and timid. And someone reminded me yesterday that when people came over, I would run and hide in my room. And, so kind of, I was a happy kid, but also just very, very sensitive. If you were crying, I was crying. So I think that kind of tension of my life, because my external life was very good, everything that you might wish for was kind of present. So even as a kid, I was aware that I was the cause of my suffering, which I think is a helpful realization to have at some point, because you can take that responsibility. But I didn't really know how to get away from anxiousness or fear. So from a young age, I was pretty interested in self-development. I wouldn't have called it back then. I just wanted to be better. I wanted to be more confident. I wanted to be more free. So since I could, even write in a journal, I was making lists of how I could improve myself or how I could be a better person, kind of just always wanting to improve. And then I did go to a Christian school for a couple of years in middle school, and that's actually where I first learned about God. So I didn't have a religious upbringing at all. And I'm still not, I don't consider myself to be religious, but I started to, kind of get into prayer and trying to be like the best girl I could be. But even that I found really stressful too. So I remember actually saying a prayer like, God, I think our relationship's over. Like I just, the weight of trying to, be perfect and follow all the rules, I just decided to put that aside too, and just really focused on being a teenager. And that's maybe a time in my life where I kind of got away from myself. I was a little bit more interested in going to parties and having my first kiss than anything kind of spiritual. But during this time, my mom, she had breast cancer, and through that she went to the Deepak Chopra Center, and there one of the things they teach is 30 minutes of meditation in the morning and the evening, kind of the TM technique. And so all through high school, my mom was meditating morning and night, but it was something so baked into my life that I didn't even really clock it. I just knew that's the time not to disturb my mom. And it wasn't until some friends came over and said, "What's she doing out there?" Like just sitting quietly. And I was like, "Oh, meditating." And it was my friends who asked her to teach us. And so she just taught us that very basic TM technique. And that evening I tried it, didn't feel anything, kind of felt frustrated, but I felt called to try it again a couple days later. And it was like the first time that I could ever remember truly feeling relaxed and like safe, probably since, the womb, like just hitting that calm. And that really piqued my interest. And so that was kind of the start of my meditation journey. And I think, going to university, that's kind of an environment where a lot of people get a little bit more stressed or depressed or start searching for meaning or purpose. And that was definitely a little bit of my story too. So the meditation was kind of like an antidote to the feeling of being lost and a little bit alone during my university time. I started to meditate very consistently. And that's when I started to have quite profound experiences and revelations through meditation. And so, but it was very much just a part of my personal life. And it wasn't until I went to a yoga teacher training, because I've always been very into yoga as well. And a couple of the participants there said, I love listening to your voice. And they knew I meditated every morning. And they said, you should make some guided meditations. But even then I didn't think about it too much. I just thought, oh, that's a nice compliment, and went about my life. But yeah, this is very much the short version. But through it all, wanting purpose so bad, I had the inspiration to create a blog and a YouTube. It was very focused on healthy living. So kind of nature and smoothies and self-love, all that good stuff. And then I thought about turning it into more of a business. So I started a Patreon, and I was wondering what to offer people in exchange for their support. And I thought about doing a meditation. And so that was the first meditation I created, was kind of just like an afterthought almost of like, I need to offer something. And my 5 patrons, 3 of which were related to me, but one of them was my mom's best friend. And she said, Lucy, more people need to hear these. And that's when I started to post them to my blog. And I don't even know how it started to grow from there, but that's when more and more people started to listen, and strangers and whatnot. And one of them was like, I'm always on Spotify. Could you put them on Spotify somehow? And I tried to put them on as songs, but you need a recording label to do so. But they had just introduced the podcast feature. And so I thought, oh, that's kind of like a workaround, was my thought. So I wasn't really starting a podcast. I was just trying to find a way to put them on the platform. And that's kind of where things started to take off more. So the way I think of it is almost like I kind of fell into making meditations. And that's actually been a bit of a theme in my life. I'm someone who desires things really intensely and doesn't actually have a ton of patience, but the best things in my life do seem to kind of come in that very gentle manner, not always in the moment I want it, but what I live today in terms of my creative expression is so far beyond anything I asked for years and years ago. And so I think if there was a kind of like meta behind this, it's really intense desire, I think, is the fuel that creates this beautiful synthesis. I really wanted to help reduce the suffering in the world. I really wanted to be net positive. When I passed away, the world was hopefully like, 0.1 or 1% better because I existed. I wanted to discover my gifts. At the time, I didn't think I had any gifts to share. And it's a little bit funny because I did have a YouTube channel where I was sharing more, inspirational stuff. And I remember my brothers friend came to visit and she said, yeah, I use your YouTube videos when I'm studying and they help me fall asleep. And I remember being kind of offended a little bit, like, oh no, like I was hoping to jazz people up about like love and that they were putting her to sleep. But that's kind of funny that a few years later, that's actually, it's a good thing that I can help people fall asleep with my voice, not necessarily a bad thing. And so my journey's been full of those, lots of that stuff. Even my sensitivity, I'm very sensitive to energy. So when I'm recording a meditation, I can feel the moment that it's almost like a river's starting to take a turn, or I've added a boulder into the stream. So I'm able to adjust things so that it maintains this steady current of whatever frequency I'm intending to put into the meditation. And I think that's what kind of gives them a flow that people are more able to maybe stay in, because I'm mindful of things that could take them into past memories or certain triggers. And I'm very conscious of keeping the energy kind of buoyant and safe in a singular energy. And so that sensitivities come in handy there as well.
I'm so floored by, I mean, first of all, thank you so much for sharing these, intimate phases of your journey. And I think what's wild and amazing to me is this, the awareness that you have of the experience for people and the frequency that you are intending. And it's funny because I have definitely had scenarios where I'm listening to a podcast or a show or something, and I get this energetic resistant or this sort of like, ooh, like an uncomfortable distrust almost of the frequency. And it's not necessarily even that there's an awareness with the person creating it. It just feels discordant for some reason. And that is one thing about your meditations that I just feel like they are in such like sacred intentionality and such high frequency. So I love that you are visualizing it. And even just a couple hours ago, I was watching this conversation around right relationship with the rivers and streams, and just your visual of the rivers and the water is so beautiful and synchronous. But I wanted to ask you, with your childhood, it seems as if you were obviously extremely sensitive to energy and maybe even taking on the energies of other spaces, places, people. Was your family energetically aware or tuned into sort of the world of that sort of mystical, unseen realm? Or was there anyone that was like able to sort of help steward you? Or did you sort of feel not like intentionally alone, but it seemed as if there was a bit of loneliness in that experience?
Yeah, I've always been someone who kind of takes things on as my fault if something's going wrong around. So that was in a strange way, like I'm also someone who's always looking for a solution. So even though it felt hard, I really believed that it was like a problem that I could fix even when I was a kid. If I could just be more confident or more let things go more easily. But neither of my parents were particularly religious or spiritual in any capacity. But what I was very blessed by is they both run their energy very cleanly, and they always have. So that was kind of the gift of my childhood, was that they're both people who are very kind of pure intentioned, clear minded, highly resourced. So it was a very supportive environment in that sense. And strangely enough, it was weird how life and strangers would always go out of their way to kind of protect me or hold me. I almost felt like I had this kind of legion of human and non-physical angels, like retrospectively, that's what I would call it, supporting me. People treated me with a lot more tenderness and care. I didn't know that I was presenting that I needed to be cared for that way, but people have always kind of been a bit gentler with me. I don't know if it's my soft cheeks and freckles or something, but yeah, so I felt supported by life. Even all the best friends I had kind of acted as almost like an interpreter towards the outer world when I was too shy to speak, and a protector when there was someone kind of abrasive or chaotic around. Like I was very supported by life, even though I was in a bit of a heightened state of energeticness. And that's how I see anxiety now, actually. Is it's almost like you're channeling more energy than your circuits can kind of hold, or than you're allowing them to hold. You might be keeping too much of it in your system and not letting it flow out in the form of expression speaking your truth. And so I think seeing the gift and you're like a lot of energy is flowing through you if you're someone who's on the more anxious compared to the more kind of calm side, that actually there's a lot of potential for creative expression and having like a very kind of a more energetic, turned on kind of life if you're able to let that energy move through you.
Wow, I love that. And it seems so resonant with the idea of not identifying with anxiety as a label for yourself, or, not holding so firmly to the energetics of our experience, and really allowing that to be a channel. And when you're talking about sort of this protection, this universal protection, it feels to me like even when you are in this heightened state of potential anxiety or these big feelings, whether they be all yours or being absorbed by other people in your field, or even unseen energies in your field. I love that the universe still mirrors to you the gentleness of your soul. Because at the root of who you are, no anxiety
Yeah.
to your soul, what you are as a being, and that, that beautiful gentleness of your nature was mirrored back to you in such important ways. And you reminded me of a story when I was a senior in high school. We were going to a dance, and my date, it was like we hydroplaned in the middle of a highway and spun around multiple times in the middle of a highway with no cars. Like it's like high traffic hour on a Saturday, and there were no cars at that moment, and I didn't have a seatbelt on, and I felt like angels holding me back in these, and we almost went like over this ledge, but miraculously, I mean, the car was a little banged up, but we were completely fine. And I remember really recognizing how held and protected, and, just that we are not alone, and we're never truly alone. And I feel like sometimes that can make people feel overwhelmed, but it's with the highest intentions. I,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, it sounds like learning TM meditation at, I'm guessing it was 18.
Yeah. Around then.
Did that sort of set you on your trajectory, or did you have any moments where you sort of felt disconnected from spirit, or was that sort of more in your youth, or like as you described, feeling sort of looking for the path, I guess, at a younger age?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's an interesting question. It's almost like when I didn't know about spirit or God, I had no conception of being connected or disconnected. I might have just thought, oh, it's a good day, it's a bad day, or I feel happy, I feel sad. And then going into my teens, in a way that I remember thinking there was a certain kind of bliss when I kind of dropped the whole idea of religion. It's almost like I didn't think of even the word God for a couple of years. And I remember feeling almost a sense of power with that. There was a simplicity to my life, not having that spiritual dimension, but then also it kind of turned into a little bit of an emptiness. I think I'm someone who does thrive on greater meaning and has lots of questions about the universe and is always trying to understand how and the why of people and everything. But one thing I would say is just throughout my whole what you could call a spiritual journey, which I would kind of say started with meditation and meditating, is that it's been very dynamic. Even in the course of a day or across a season, I'll have times where I feel very lit up and connected, and even moments of the day where I feel completely just like a potato is what how I describe it, just flat. And but yeah, I would say I've always felt that spirit was there. And actually, when I started to meditate more, 1 or 2 years in, I started automatic writing. Probably most of your listeners are familiar with the Artist's Way. Is probably the best teaching tool of automatic writing that I've come across. And so that's how I would communicate with spirit every day. And I think when you're kind of watering that connection, it does grow. And I was asking a lot. I wanted to connect to. I think around that time I was more in the mindset of like Christ consciousness and ascended masters, and so just having this deep desire to connect and write. And strangely enough, the only time I really felt disconnected for a longer period of time was a very silly experience that was kind of scary at the time, but I can roll my eyes at now, when I actually had a little THC Rice Krispie. And normally I don't I don't have drugs or even really drink alcohol, but it it caused this really traumatic experience for me where I almost felt like my tether to everything I knew to be good was cut. It wasn't like a temporary thing even afterwards. Like 3 days later, still feeling like I couldn't find happiness, or I couldn't find my connection to spirit. But I was really grateful for that experience too, because a lot of people who come to my work do have PTSD or panic attacks. And I had no kind of conception of that. I just kind of had my kind of light form of anxiety that I had so consistently that it wasn't super problematic. It was more like, oh, just take a deep breath. But having that more intense experience, I think allowed me to create better meditations. And I even made one specifically for that kind of gripping fear might come, especially in the middle of the night, or for me around my period or the full moon. And it's called Fear is Just a Sensation, if anyone's looking for that. And that's kind of how I soothed myself out of this existential panic that was part of my life probably for a year. Not every moment of every day, but just kind of waves of it would hit me. And I was so grateful. One thing I guess I did channel from spirit was this awareness that it was PTSD, but it was kind of like an earthquake, where there's the main earthquake, the main event, and then there's aftershocks, but each one is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and further and further. So instead of kind of identifying myself as, oh, I'm someone who could get a panic attack or has this trigger around marijuana, it became this thing of, oh, this is temporary. And every time I got that feeling or that fear, I was like just riding out the wave until, it's been years and years since I've had anything close to that feeling of panic. And if it does come even in the slightest bit when I'm in a very weakened state of being, fatigued, maybe a day away from my menstrual cycle, I'm very quick to be like, nah, I can't even bother with that. Like I will not go down that trail of that spiral. And I think if you catch it quickly, it's really helpful. So that was the only time I felt kind of disconnected from spirit, but it ended up being this massive gift in my life, because I am someone who wants to genuinely be able to help people. And I think unless you've gone through something or taken the journey yourself,
Hmm. It's so interesting to hear about that experience. And my experience as a child was really feeling and seeing energies no longer embodied. So I have a really unique relationship to sort of the unseen world, and something, I mean, I lived in great fear of that for many, many years.
yeah,
And I numbed myself for many, many years also, through college and even pretty well into my adulthood, which is part of why I want to talk about all these things, because to me, what has sort of come through from spirit around the unseen world is this idea that everything originates from light. Like all of existence
yeah,
originates from this creator event where everything originates from light. But in order to create, duality, polarity, basically make things interesting, there are these other sort of experiences, but that oftentimes it is simply our belief, the imprint of our souls. Say that someone lives a life in which they feel a tremendous amount of guilt. They are told at a young age that they are not good, they're not worthy, they're not enough. And then they believe that, and they believe that such that they do things that are out of alignment with their soul's truth and that light, that eternal light within, such that they begin to believe about themselves those negative things. And then they die in that energy of belief, that basically that imprint of their soul, even though their soul is never like trapped on earth, if they believe that they should be and that they are, that is what their penance is in life, that they can create that reality for an imprint of their experience. And not, but that really it's the almost the realization that you are infinite light at any point in your journey, whether you're embodied or you're disembodied, that releases you from that, creation. So I'm curious, like I have definitely had experiences with sort of what I would consider sort of dark energies or, entities. And maybe that doesn't ring true to your belief system or your truth. But would you say with that THC experience, did you feel like there was interference of any other types of energies, or is that not something that really resonates for you?
Yeah, I think that's probably what happened. It's almost like I opened up a door and I didn't have the any protection, and so it was just a flood of that almost just like pure distilled fear. But I do remember too when I very first started to meditate consistently, I would kind of with my eyes closed just have this almost like a bats flying in, these energies kind of trying to distract me. They also felt kind of like fear or distraction, a little bit malevolent was just how I would interpret it. It didn't like really scare me, but it did kind of feel like almost like I was reaching a point of clarity, and this was kind of like the final boss to pass through this disturbance. And I remember sharing with my mom, who talk to her friend who's just very spiritual, also sees energies, has visions, one of those cool kinds of people. And she told me to just ask, to lay on my bed with my hand on my heart and reach up and ask, basically the spirit, Holy Spirit, spirit of light, to come and protect me. And it was kind of a crazy experience because I really did feel this wave of light come, and I could feel my magnetic field undulating and kind of harmonizing with spirit. And I never had any of that kind of interference again. And that's the only reason I share stuff like that, because I think you can ask for help and you can get help. And I didn't feel like any of that could really hurt me, but it's just kind of like someone, jumping and going, boo, that kind of, which, if you can get rid of it, that's nice as well. And in the liminal state too, I've had some kind of scary, like I don't love to use the word demon. I almost feel kind of funny saying that, but where you get that sleep paralysis and hear very, very scary voices. And that's usually when the Christianity comes back in for me, where I'm like, Jesus, me, angels, whoever's out there, I'll take it.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, I don't
I'm
think that
sorry.
can ever truly hurt you. But
Totally. And I love that perspective. And it's funny because I have a really unique relationship with Jesus, I feel like, which has really come back into my life in more recent years. And I had a kind of strong relationship to Jesus that really ended when I was in ninth grade, when I realized that Jesus wasn't really the writer of any portion of the Bible, and that, there were no women writers in the Bible. And there were just all these things that like didn't really make sense to me. And I heard some writings or, some of the Gospel of Thomas, which is just come back into my life in the last 2 to 3 days, where I was listening to this book on Mary Magdalene and just that whole story and how she was really sort of persecuted from the Bible. But I agree, Christ consciousness and, sort of this Holy Spirit of light does seem very
yeah.
pervading in protection. And I also believe that, I got a message in December that was the second coming of Christ is happening now, and it's the awakening of Christ consciousness in humanity. And it was never meant to be a fear.
Yes.
Yeah, never meant to be a fear mechanism and used in a way that sort of controlled people. And so I love your calling on Christ, but also just the very simple ability to, call in your spiritual sovereignty within your body by working with angels, by working with Jesus or any other divine, being ascended
Mhm.
light. And I wanted to ask you, with your meditations, Do you feel, and with your work in general, do you feel like you're working with the angels, your spirit team? Like, do you have guides in which, or are you sort of just this open channel, not open, because, clearly
Yeah,
you don't
no,
want to be open to
I
everything.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, with the meditations, it does. I think the Christ consciousness has kind of been like a consistent on my spiritual journey, and that's how I would describe it. I don't have like a specific spirit that I'm like, oh, this is Ralph, and together we type meditations. But I definitely like. It's kind of funny. I even move my head in a certain way where It's almost like I'm listening for this thread or this cord up to this big light realm where it does feel a little bit more like the divine masculine than the divine feminine. Christ consciousness, ascended masters, kind of in collaboration with my oversoul spirit, is how I would describe it. And it's something I feel into every week. I have lots of ideas for meditations because I'm so passionate about taking wisdom and then making a meditation for it where you can really practice it. I think that's at least one of the major themes of my work. Is I want to create that space where we can practice what we preach and really anchor it in. But each week, I don't have a plan. I really it's just this feeling of this is correct this week. And it might mirror something that I'm learning in my life or inspired by. But yeah, and then I type everything out first. I think that's writing, typing for me is just getting the clearest signal. And then I record it.
I love that. Yeah, and I wanted to go back to what you said about the artist's way. That was actually the book I was reading when the blueprint, like the first season, started to come through for me about this sort of framework. It was really, really in part inspired by that. And I think writing, whether it be typing or in your journal, is so effective in creation, but also in cleansing yourself of things that need to be, exercised in meaningful ways. I would love to also understand in terms of, have you kind of received any messages or kind of tuned into the idea of new earth, or this concept of new earth? Has that come through for you around like this? I don't know if I think it's a different frequency, but it's attainable.
Yeah,
But what
absolutely.
any thoughts about that?
I have lots of thoughts. I almost think I live a little bit of like a double life because in my work I keep it very simple, but Lucy on the side is kind of deep into, wants to know about aliens and human design and manifestation. This is what I love, spiritual things and talking about them. So New Earth, yeah, I think the first time it was introduced to me was through Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth, which his work was probably the first, truly spiritual book I read. Even before I started meditating, I found a CD of his and listened to it before sleep. But so I'm very curious and enamored, and I've had a couple of spontaneous experiences where it almost felt like I did enter another dimension. In this dimension, everything slowed down, got quiet, and I could just see the beauty of every single person and the perfection of, like, even the way the cars are positioned, every leaf on the tree, just feeling the perfection and beauty. And kind of had this understanding that this is always present. There's always an aspect of each one of us who's actually kind of in that dimension here that we absolutely have access to. But it is a frequency. And what was really, when I was in that state of unconditional love, I knew every person I saw across space and time, like down to every detail of the day they just had and how they felt about themselves, but in the context of who they truly are, which to me I would translate into words as almost like a god, rock star, king, queen. It was like every single person, and there was no measure of like, oh, there's the extra special one. And it was like everyone was just, I could have cried and, kissed their feet. I felt so in awe of and they were just, walking on the street. But I had this revelation. I had many revelations in that experience because it was very dimensional. But one of them was that unconditional love is the key to that, because it makes it safe, we could technically kind of read each other's fields at any given time, but it's a really good thing that unconditional love is the pathway into that complete knowing, because that's what kind of keeps that safe. So we're not kind of using that information against each other. It would cause a lot of distortion to have that amount of energy and information coming at us just on a regular day. But when you're in that very spacious, very high frequency, you can kind of safely hold and steward that energy. And so those kinds of experience really excited me. And there's a part of me that just wants to get there and live there all the time. And it was very obvious too that the moment my frequency started to drop back was the moment I got afraid. I had this feeling like, will I not be able to connect with people anymore? Will I not be able to kind of live out my life as just a regular teenager, young person? And it was kind of like doop, 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 and just kind of settled back into me.
Oh gosh, wow, that sounds so epic. And it reminds me of like Kundalini energy. It's like that when I had this Kundalini awakening, it was similar in that it was just this absolute oneness with all beings, every leaf, every blade of grass, and just this knowing of interconnection that was beyond infinite. And it's so interesting because I appreciate that sort of discernment of wisdom, that it really is about this trust, deep, deep trust in people's ability to maintain integrity in that sort of dimension where you're saying like you almost have access to everything and everyone. But it's also funny because like the spiritual realm really does have a lot of access to us. So it's like we have to maintain trust with the unseen world already in a very similar way, right? That they're going to cover and hold our best interests. I love that. And so do you think the new earth, like, is it in this moment, is it more important for us to be shedding the lower vibrational energy? Or what, I guess, do you think is the most important thing to get our consciousness as a collective to that level? And I also just quickly want to honor Eckhart Tolle's book, because that book too, to me, was such an absolute divine truth of words. It was incredible.
Like a key to new earth, I think, that he gave. And what I think is so fascinating, sorry, this is a slight digression, is just there almost does seem to be like a bit of a themed pathway to a lot of people's spiritual journey. It's almost uncanny how many people start out with maybe just healthy eating even, and then kind of get into someone like Eckhart Tolle, a little bit of meditation and crystals. And I don't know, how the way it winds is very fascinating to me, and can even circle back on itself too. It's not like there's levels, but it's just, I kind of love it. Yeah. And I think for new earth, yeah, I would say one of the biggest things is I don't want to say removing, seems like too strong of a word, but kind of moving out of judgment feels like a really big key for new earth. And almost like removing the ideas of right and wrong, because yes, we're in a polar world, and that's very important actually, and very beautiful to have extremes and everything in between that creates movement and the ability for life to exist. But I think it's all the stories we've created about this living energy. It's almost like we're creating periods and endpoints and boxes and blocks, and that's inhibiting the flow of love, of connection, of growth, of expansion. And I think kind of that idea of judgment and right and wrong is kind of the main stopping point. Even the idea that someone or something could be wrong, I believe, is a distortion, which can feel confronting, because there's certain things that almost everyone would agree, yeah, like don't do that or it's wrong. But I think even with those things, we could come to a place of that causes less life or less well-being, just kind of from a discerning kind of evaluative point of view, without all the stories about what that means for the person or the event and the effects of it. It's we've almost gone too deep in our stories and into the dream. So just, I think that's where meditation becomes powerful, because you can start to question those stories, untangle them, choose whether you want to participate in certain dramas or judgments. But that's one of the main things that came to mind, is just removing this idea of wrong, and doing the best to get out of the habit of evaluating ourselves so deeply, and then certainly others. And it's a linked phenomenon. As you do it, judge yourself less, you're naturally going to have more grace for other people, and vice versa.
That resonates so deeply. And I remember when like Russia declared war on Ukraine, I wrote this big post about judgment being fear in disguise, and that, it's really this deep fear that manipulates and shows up as this need to control or this deep insecurity or this, these different masks, but really are all rooted in some sort of fear or,
Yeah.
all
And that
discordance.
awareness, if it does it, I think this is, I don't know if you're familiar with the Course in Miracles. Are you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And just that foundation, I think one of the foundations of it, I would say, is just the idea of almost, you can almost separate the polarities into love and fear. And I think that does help simplify it too, because if you're looking just at the action, there's certain words or behaviors that we've sorted into the love box or the fear box. But sometimes it sounds like love, but it's actually coming from fear and vice versa. So being able to kind of sense those energies, to know, to have a bit of a North Star of what love and goodness feels like, and then being able to use that to kind of parse through those energies, because it can sound really logical or very intelligent, but if it's not coming from that place of love, the fruit of whatever it is will be whatever's kind of sown to start with.
Totally. And I love from A Course in Miracles, this statement, anything that isn't love isn't truth.
Yeah.
Basically, whatever isn't love is some sort of a distortion, even though it may appear one way, it's through these deep layers of, manipulative distortion, in which it has gotten off the path of love in some way, shape, or form. And, I have this big calling to work with and help to try to bridge the huge human fear of death. And I think the fear of death is at the root of so many of our current challenges and problems. And relative to sort of winding that into consciousness, because I think to your point earlier is like consciousness and spirituality is a never ending spiral in which you can continue to just learn and learn and learn and learn. And it's, it's our soul's purpose in so many ways. But this idea of people over the last 100 years getting really off course with reincarnation and the idea of eternal energy, and that our souls are endless beings of light, being interconnected, to these fears, to these challenges. So I'm curious about sort of your relationship to the idea of past lives and just your perspectives on this sort of, for me, it came through that the fear of death is a big, big business, that it's the root of a lot of money. So curious about what your feelings are on those subjects.
Yes, I completely agree. And I listened to your most recent episode, and I encourage anyone who hasn't to go listen to that, because I think you both of you did such a beautiful job of breaking it down and lifting it up into a new place that I think even just listening is the medicine, and the paradigm has been shifted. But I would say one thing with meditation is, I don't know if this will happen to everyone, but at some point I had to confront my fear of death, almost the idea of not existing, through meditation, not even purpose. It just kind of arose through the spontaneous sitting. And I would say since I was about 22, I have no fear of death. Still a little bit of fear of suffering that I think is pretty natural, but truly felt like at any point in time I could pass peacefully. But yeah, to your point, I think it's been one of the most liberating things. It's like this weight off your shoulders. Because one thing I didn't share about my childhood that I'm just remembering now was that I had this deep, deep sense in my bones that I would die young. It was kind of just something that was always present. I was almost certain that I would be kidnapped or attacked by a bear. It's kind of funny. There's probably a word for that fear of death. So losing that, and truly, like, it's like my life opened up in such magical ways. So I wouldn't know how to imbue someone with a sense of that, but I think if you had the desire to be less afraid of death, you'd be naturally taken on a journey. And I think certainly learning about reincarnation, the fact that you said you were reading the Gospel of Thomas, I'm not sure if that's the gospel that talks about reincarnation, but I know there's one, maybe it's the book of Enoch. There's some part of the Bible that was taken out, or the parts about reincarnation. And you could see how that could really control people. That's like, this is your one shot, you get it right, and here's what right is, good luck. But this idea that we're these evolving consciousness is almost opens up more space to make mistakes, which I think paradoxically creates much more space for our beauty and our goodness to be revealed too. It's almost like once you stop fearing something, it stops controlling you, and now you're just back in that light that you are. There's nothing in between you and it.
Well, and you have the freedom of choice of how and who, like the more that you can shed that is sort of distracting you about your inner world through the fear or through the doubt or the shame or the guilt, the more that you can shed those emotions, the more clear it becomes as to what your truth really is. And I think so it's interesting because I listened to this audiobook, and I never listen to audiobooks. I usually like read the book, but it just came on literally very serendipitously. So you know how that goes. I'm like, I have to listen. And it was this story of Mary Magdalene. And what was so fascinating was she was Jesus's wife and bore his child, per a lot of other accounts outside of the Bible. In the Bible, they made her out to be, and she was referenced as a prostitute, but also it alludes to this idea that, Jesus favored her. She was his like right hand person. Obviously, if it's his wife and the mother of his child, of course, and he taught her many, many different healings and took her on all these different experiences. And then she was present at his crucifixion. And I literally started bawling, crying the moment that I heard this story, but it was talking about her being taught how to heal. And she had her hands over the shoulders of a boy with leprosy, and basically started seeing all these visualizations of different experiences of trauma. And Jesus basically said, those are the past lives that this boy is unknowingly carrying within his body. And it was basically like what she needed to clear was these karmic scenarios that this poor young boy had no conscious awareness of, no, probably even subconscious awareness. It's almost like embedded in his DNA. But just this realization of like, how their whole sort of point was just like, we are these infinite creators, but it's our own limitations of these, even putting ourselves through these scenarios of different ways of experience life or death that like cause imprints just based on, the fact that maybe in that life we don't have our connection to the inner light and spirit and the all-knowing, that's required to process that.
Yeah, I think that's so profound. And yeah, I'm almost of a mind that we can kind of choose to, if we're having karma, it's not something that's kind of forced on us. It's almost something the soul would choose, of like, oh, I almost had it, like I almost figured that out, or like that stirred up a lot for me. Next time I'm gonna wrap it with a bow, or move through it, or I'm gonna double down and get the double bounce from it the third time round. So I think our souls are quite playful because they know that nothing can be truly taken from them. I think our souls are quite playful in the expressions and love polarity, and they're not having such an evaluative experience of it. So it's not like if someone's troubled, it's like, because you were naughty last time, this is atonement. I think there's a lot more of like in a video game where you want to figure out the level and see where you went wrong. And you don't want to just jump to level 100. You kind of want to take the whole journey there. And it did remind me, it was so funny. A listener who I don't know just sent me a meditation by Brian Scott. It was probably from it was like 2021. And I just clicked on it. I was midday in my living room. And all of a sudden I was taken on this kind of past life vision journey in my living room. Of almost being like this bipedal cat with a mage staff in somewhere in the Orion galaxy. Like it was kind of crazy. Like it was like wartime vibes. But I've also had, with each of my family members, I asked in deep meditation, when was the last time we were together? And specifically with my siblings, I was able to see the last time we were siblings a long time ago. Felt like Earth, but I'm not even fully sure. And just to see the dynamics, and I could see through that vision. I won't go into the details, but that we're really meant to learn to love and respect each other's differences. It's almost like in that lifetime, we just we could not accept that the other had different motives, different desires than us. But in this one, it's like to see the difference and to celebrate and feel the importance of, you're so different from me, and that's so right, and that's so good. And I noticed when I started to lean into loving them more and seeing their gifts, then you get that beautiful gift where the kind of transformation, the inner angel is revealed to you. That was there all along, but you couldn't see through your judgments and whatnot. So, and with my dad, I kind of discovered that we'd actually had many lifetimes together, almost like a Batman and Robin team that at least in my dream state, it seems like we're always trying to prevent system collapse in some galaxy or another. It's a bit of an ongoing saga, but yeah, it's fascinating, and I take everything with a grain of salt. I wouldn't like stake my, I wouldn't say anything is 100% certain, but I think it's a fascinating thing to explore.
Yeah, it's so funny. And thank you for saying that, because I agree. Like, when I say things, sometimes I'm like, this is how it is, but it's how it is for me. And it's always, I feel like
Yeah.
we know what is true in our souls when we hear something or we see something or we feel something, but that does not mean that it is a universal truth or a truth to even anyone else. But it's interesting. I totally agree with you about sort of karma. I don't believe it's like a negative stamp. I really do believe our souls are choosing very consciously our learning and experiences. And, that's the other thing. Like, if we're, infinite beings, we're out here forever, like we got to mix
Yeah.
it up a little bit too. But your
Yeah.
comment about being fearful of dying at a young age, it just made me think, like, you've definitely done that before a few times, and maybe your last life was a very tragic young death, or maybe the last
Mhm.
couple, which usually I also had a like sort of this belief that I wouldn't live past 30 for some reason. And I do think that my last life was in the 1940s, and I'm pretty sure I died at like 28 or something. So, who
Yeah.
knows? No one can be sure, but like, if it feels true, that's super interesting. And I don't think I've seen a past life meditation from you specifically, but maybe, I mean, you have over 300. So like,
Yeah.
maybe I just
Yeah,
haven't.
no, I haven't made one. I would have to wonder about how to guide people just because it came through me a little bit spontaneously. So there's certain things I kind of leave to the listener and their spirit, between them and them. But I do, one of my courses is called Into the Silence, is more about getting people comfortable sitting in silence and having that time, because I think it's a very powerful and important companion to have. I almost see guided meditations as, or the ones I make at least, as their own thing. And then to have that time where you truly just sit with you and feel all the gunkiness and the tension, but also that big light and unity, is so powerful. And I think from that place, we're kind of all guided on our perfect journey. I almost see it as this like geometric pattern kaleidoscope unfolding where you'll always get what's exactly right for you at the right time from yourself, especially.
I
But
love
sometimes
that.
it comes through other people too. Yeah.
I love that fractal. That's so resonant for me really deeply. Well, I mean, this conversation and just everything about you is just so beautiful and engaging and exhilarating for me personally. And I do want to ask you, as we end all of our blueprints, what you see for the highest possible future for all. If you have a vision for that, if there's things that you
Yeah.
for, or what that looks like for you.
Yeah. Well, I kind of have my own utopian vision that has a lot to do with a lot more nature and sustainability. I have that side to me. That's what I studied in school. So the environmental side of Lucy is excited for buildings made out of living materials that grow themselves. I'm really interested in that aspect of engineering and evolution. But I think one of the biggest shifts that could happen at this time is kind of without sounding too corny, the self-love movement. I think for a lot of people, that just making peace and that acceptance and that enoughness creates a space where people's gifts can be unlocked. And I think that's when we're going to see the most kind of growth and evolution, is when people are really recognizing that they have gifts, that their expression is important, and that they're sharing it with the world. Because I think each of us really are this perfect instrument in the orchestra that is meant to be played and heard and seen and shown. And so whatever would connect people to their life force, and gifts doesn't mean, performing and doing art and things like that. It could be very quiet. It could be very simple. But just, yeah, how can we connect people to their life force? Because the world, that utopian vision is really just people who are in alignment. How exciting would it be to meet people on the street who are just feeling good and loving themselves, and, just in this spacious, gracious energy where it's just having fun and synchronicity and being guided by intuition. I really, that's kind of the future that I feel is inevitable. And I'm not in a rush to get there, but I do want to be a part of creating that by, first off, living it myself. And then, anyone who comes into contact with me, sharing to the best of my knowledge how to find that alignment, how to connect with your gifts, your purpose, and to enjoy life.
You are definitely creating that vision and that new earth. And, to your comment at the beginning, you for sure have made this world a better place by your being here and by everything that you are gifting us all. So thank you so much, Lucy, for this beautiful conversation today.
Thank you, Marley. You are such a beautiful soul. And like I said, I can feel the kindredness. I hope we have more conversations, and I hope we get to meet in person too, because I just have a feeling there's many touch points of resonance between us.
Totally. Okay, I'm going to stop it.